This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Hello, and welcome to Her Story, the show to encourage more women to explore the possibility of using their skills and talents by participating in leadership roles within our community. I'm Tiffany James, and I have the pleasure of hosting this program. Her Story is here to encourage women in our community to actively engage and use their voice to bring attention to issues they are passionate about, with the hope that we will all get more involved. Please welcome my guest, Mayor of Georgian, Bluffs, Sue Carleton. Having previously served on the Georgian Bluffs Township Council for 4 years, followed by 4 years as deputy mayor, she is now currently the mayor of Georgian Bluffs. She has also sat on the Grey County Council for 4 years. She has a wealth of experience and knowledge within our community, and I'm very excited to have Mayor Carleton on the show today. Welcome, Mayor. I'm excited to hear your story.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. It's great to have a chance to do this.
Oh, I think it's so important to have women in politics, women in power. And when I started this show, I was like, I know exactly who I want to interview, Mayor Carleton with Georgian Bluffs, because your story is great. You've been on council a total of 8 years now. This is your first year as mayor, or we're almost going into your second.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about your background and what made you want to get involved in politics in the first place.
So I have a family history of this. My great-grandfather was actually, it was Reeve at that time of the former Albemarle Township. And he was one of 20 men instrumental in each putting in $5 back in 1901 to get the town of Wyerton incorporated because they saw the value in doing that. And then his son, my great-uncle, was on as 2 terms of Reeve in Albemarle. And my own father was on, not as Reeve, but counselor for 3 terms in Albemarle. At the same time, Dad's sister, my Aunt Cheryl, was also on Wyerton Council. And a cousin was clerk for Lion's Head at that time. So it's sort of a whole family history, and it just seemed the next progression. And then during the time my husband and I owned Embroidery in Owen Sound, I was on the Downtown Improvement Association Board of Management. So it just all has sort of led to, after we sold the business and retired, I didn't last very long before I was a little bored. So I ran for council.
Were you successful? Were you successful in your first run for council? I'm
Yes.
sorry, I'm not. Yeah.
Yes.
Well,
Yep.
I can just picture a little Sue running around council chambers in Wyerton. I'm sure maybe that didn't happen, but I just think maybe that's where the passion started from.
Well, I think council was a lot different back then. When I talked to my dad, where we get all our information sent to us ahead of time, and there's so much more that we have to know now, they got everything presented at the meeting.
Oh,
and
wow.
You didn't have all the committees and everything, but they didn't have to worry about the Clean Water Act or Conservation Authority, or definitely climate change wasn't something that was on their radar. So it was a huge difference, but it was still important work that needed to be done. And I think that's what's led municipal councils to being so in-depth now.
Wow. So would you say those were the main influences in your life that led you towards this path, or was it being the business owner and working with the DIA, which is now the River District, that led you to have a passion for getting involved?
I think a combination of both. I know certainly my Aunt Cheryl and cousin Juanita, as women, were huge factors because they were doing things and speaking on topics that normally were male dominated. And I always kind of respected that and wanted to do that little more.
And what years would you say that they were on council? I'm sorry if I missed that, because that is huge, because that's not normal back.
No,
You're right.
so Aunt Cheryl would have been on council in Wyerton back in very late 1970s into 1980s.
Wow.
And my cousin Juanita would have been working around that same time through to maybe 1990 as clerk of, would have been Lion's Head at that time.
We already talked about it a little bit when you said when you retired from your business, which was embroidery, which I didn't know that. I know you were a business owner, but I didn't realize it was the embroidery. I got several jackets when I was on the track team for high school. They had our jackets done there and
Yep.
everything. I did it. I miss I missed that. But what would you say? Was it the retirement from business that set you on this path, or was there something else that also motivated you to, like, what changed the trajectory in your life towards this?
So the retiring from the business and having time to give back to the community. So I've always been involved. When my daughters were 12 to 15, they were in 4-H. So I was the 4-H leader. When my kids went to Sunday school, I was the Sunday school teacher. So it was when we retired from the business, I no longer had 3 little children at home. They were all young adults and out on their own. And I had 4 grandchildren by that time. But I had the time to do things, and I've always been interested in a variety of things. So I enjoy the challenges of council, that even the weeks where it's a 1,300-page agenda, and you really need to take all that in and retain it, which isn't always easy. I just enjoy the challenge of that and of doing something to make a difference for the community, to make sure that we have a good place to live.
I love that. I just recently heard you're doing, is it this weekend, I believe you're having a Christmas lighting at the Shallow
We
Lake?
are. That's a brand new thing for Georgian Bluffs. So there's apparently going to be 2 large trees and some other trees that we are going to light. Keppel Sarawak School Choir is going to be there, and they are going to be entertaining us. There's a fundraiser, I think, going on at the same time for the new dog park that's going to take place down in the village of Shallow Lake. And minor hockey is running the concession booth inside the arena as a fundraiser for minor hockey. So there's going to be a lot going on there. It starts at 6 o'clock tonight.
I love that. And there's also you can bring donations for the Intertownship Toy Drive, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. I love to see the more events happening within the Georgian Bluffs. I think that's so neat because you are such a vast area, so it's really hard to try to choose where you're going to hold these events. So I love that you're doing it in multiple. Like, I think that's great.
Yep.
So what would you say is the biggest thing that motivates you? I can tell you like to keep busy because it's not an easy task being the mayor of the township of Georgian Bluffs. You just said 13-page agenda coming your way. Is it just so what motivates you to do to get involved?
I think back to the challenge. I mean, and I have to laugh the odd time. When I was working my way through that 1,300-page agenda, and some of it is the dullest stuff you've ever read, but you still need to know it. And I'm thinking, I used to read happy books, things with happy endings. And now I read things that periodically make me want to bang my head against a wall. But it's still, there's something to it. Just always taking in more information and learning more. And I've always loved to read. So I think that's just, and that's a family trait. My grandfather was a reader, and Grandpa always had books around. One of my favorite gifts as a child, and I grew up in a fairly poor household, we'll say. And one year, Mom had managed to pick up a box of books at a used bookstore or whatever. And that box of books was Robinson Crusoe and Nancy Drew and the Bobbsey twins and Heidi. I forget all of them, the Hardy Boys. And I was just fascinated by it, to sit down and read. I remember starting school, and I went to a one-room schoolhouse, and I was just excited because there were books on the shelves and there was paper and pencils and you could do things. So it's always been kind of what's brought me pleasure. And yeah, it's just me. My kids think I'm a little weird, and the grandkids
Oh,
just roll their eyes at me, but that's okay.
I love reading too. A good book
Yeah,
can take you on such a crazy journey in places that you
yeah,
couldn't normally maybe get to in
that's
regular
right.
life. I agree.
Yep.
Could you tell me a little bit of the challenges that you're facing, or I guess the differences from being on the council to moving into your role as a mayor?
I wouldn't say there's a huge change. The biggest difference I find, and this is maybe more my approach to being mayor, I don't feel it's the mayor who needs to step out and speak first. I like to hear from all of council. I see my role as mayor as being one of leader, of bringing out the best in people and acknowledging that around that council table, I have people with far more information, intelligence than I have, far better educated than I am. And I see my role as bringing out the best in them so that we all together arrive at good decisions for the residents of the township.
And that's what makes a great leader when you take from others. That's just my opinion, but I think that's if you can listen and hear and be humble and know that others can bring importance to the table, it's what makes a great leader. Um,
I hope so, because I like to hear from them. It's when, and what I find with this council, and I'm really very proud of them all, um, they don't always agree, but they disagree respectfully. And I like that. There's
yes.
no condescension, condescension or putting each other down. They work together and arrive at a result or an answer to a problem that we think collectively is going to work best for the township. And I think it's always keeping that at the front of our mind. There are challenges. Potawatomi needs a new water system. Climate action is costly. How do we fit that into the budget? We're just starting the budget process on Monday, and we have a list of 36 items to go through to decide what's going to get priority. What are we spending money on? What are the items that we don't have a choice but to move to the top of the list? And some of those are pretty high priced items. So, how do we make this a budget that the residents can live with and feel it's what they need in their best interest?
Can you tell me what you're looking forward to most as your term with as mayor on what you want to see, what your goals are for the township of Georgian Bluffs, what you'd like to see happen? You mentioned the climate action. Is that something you're passionate about? I know you're very passionate about the trails and
Yeah.
the parks of Georgian Bluffs. Can you tell me what you like to see happen with your term?
If I were to say I had one real goal, it would revolve around a lot of things. So, but my biggest thing I think is community, bringing the communities together. So I'm also on Community Schools Alliance. And one of the articles I'm reading for this afternoon's meeting has to do with what was the effect on communities when schools were closed and taken out of there. And the public school in Shallow Lake was closed, I'm going to say back in the early 70s. And members of the community still talk about the impact that had on the community because older people, seniors in the community, if there were a concert going on or something special, they were there at the school. So the kids in the community knew the elders. When they were all bused to Keppel Sarawak, for a lot of those seniors, they then couldn't make that trip. So the community started to fall apart because the kids didn't know the seniors and vice versa. They didn't have a connection. And I think the
Mm.
same somewhat happened with the Derby School when it closed. Kemble's one room school would have closed years and years ago. And it affects the community when that happens. People
Mhm.
go out elsewhere looking for that. And I sense now, especially with COVID, people are coming back home to their communities and they're looking for things to do together. And that's where it comes back to council working on their behalf to make sure there's places in those communities for them to come together. There's spaces for them to enjoy being with their family, their friends, their neighbors. And whether that's parks, trails, community centers, I think we have to, for some of them, look a little outside the normal of what a community center is and include all age groups. And what do all age groups need to get from that, including the working generation who maybe aren't in the community as much. So if I were to say I have one passion, it would be that rebuild those communities and give them a reason for being there and a reason for having other people move to that community.
I love that. That's amazing. What led you to want to be involved in politics? Was it watching your family do it? Was there something that you saw happen and you're like, oh, well, I bet you I could make a change if I got involved. Can you tell me, was there a certain point or was it just always something you were passionate about?
I wouldn't say it's something I was always passionate about. If there's many times I think I'm amazed that I ended up in this position because I have absolutely no idea how that happened, really. But it goes back to when Carrie and I sold our business, and I'd been home for about a year, and there was an ad in the newspaper looking for, excuse me, committee members for the Township of Georgian Bluffs for the remuneration committee. I thought I could do that. It was only going to be 3 or 4 meetings, and I think it ended up being 5. And there were 2 others on the committee with me. And it was to look at what was council currently being paid, what should they be paid, what was reasonable. And from that, then it became, oh, there's an election coming, and people started saying, well, you should be on there. So that's how I sort of landed up, and it seemed like a good idea, so I did it.
What have you learned in the 8 years that, well, I guess we're now in the 9th, the one with mayor. What have you learned in your 8 years being involved with the Township of Georgian Bluffs?
There's a lot more to it than just plowing the roads, and it's just the sheer magnitude of what council members have to know. Mm-hmm. So you start with the Clean Water Drinking Act. You need to know that. You need to know what minimum maintenance standards are for roads. What are the different classes of roads? You need to understand water systems. We have a biodigester. We had an airport. You have to have enough knowledge about those to be able to make good decisions. And that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg. I'm also on the Grey Sauble Conservation Authority, and that's takes you in a whole new direction. It's just, I think it's overwhelming to some people when they first get on and they think, oh, I was just going to have 2 or 3 meetings a month, I thought. And there are for council, but then there's library board, there's Intertownship Fire Department, there's the police board. I'm on Community Schools Alliance. Like it's phenomenal the amount of different things. You've got to consider agriculture and how that affects the community. Yes. You need to consider your industrial, your commercial base.
It's a lot. You don't realize
it is a lot,
how much.
And I know I'm missing huge sections of it, but I like that challenge.
Oh, I want to talk a little bit. You mentioned library. I know that the North Grey Public Library now has a book vending machine in the Shallow Lake Arena. What a great idea! What made council decide that would be an awesome opportunity?
So that idea came from the library board, from Tim Nichols Harrison, and between Tim and his staff there, and they approached Georgian Bluffs to find out would we be interested, and we are. Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see how that pans out. I've heard a lot of positive comments. I think especially people in the village where they're going to be able to just slip up to the community center and borrow a book and take books back. And
so you can take books back to the vending machine?
Yep. You can take them back. There'll be a return box there where you can return books to the library.
I love it. I
Yeah.
love the idea of the outreaching to the community that way. Like,
Yep.
yes, you were just saying the shallow lake with the school and how the community felt lost. What a great way to bring people back together. And
Yeah.
reading is always an excellent adventure.
Yes.
Um, can you tell me a little bit about the current climate action plan that Georgian Bluffs is working on? Maybe?
I can't tell you a lot about it. I've read the document. Um, it's being implemented. We just got approval from, I think it's PCP for the third level of that. So it's in 4 different stages and you work
Okay.
through each stage. So I think we're at the third one on that one now. It's really, that one's been community driven. So the
Yeah.
majority of the people who sat on that committee were volunteers, educated volunteers in this area or self-educated because it's a huge interest of theirs. And they've really been the drivers for doing this for the township. Staff have worked with them. Councillor Coburn and I were on the initial committee just to really keep them on track with what's the procedural ways we have to do things at the township. But they really have been the driver for getting all of the reports done, for studying things, for bringing information back. So
Well,
it's a good thing.
Georgian Bluffs is such a gorgeous area with,
Yeah.
and it is a lot with agriculture and the vast scenic areas you can go visit within Georgian Bluffs alone. So it's nice to see that the township is taking into account how to protect those areas with the current climate conditions that we're all facing. So I just wanted to touch a little bit on that.
Yeah.
It's a passion of mine too.
Well, and one of the things that was interesting, the very first meeting I went to was out at Kemble United Church, and it was the Georgian Bluffs Community Action Team. And they were questioning some of the basic things that were being done. And I think a lot of the climate action groups were looking at these things as how much salt are you putting on your roads? And Georgian Bluffs was already at a 3% mix into sand. We had been doing that for a number of years at that time. So we were a little ahead of the curve on that. They wanted to know about lighting in the community centers. And we had already, through local authority services, converted to the LED lighting. So we were ahead there. So I think that really incentivized them to say, wow, we've already got our first two things, the objectives they thought they'd really have to fight to get were in place. And it encouraged them to go ahead and do more.
Love that. What's something that piques your interest that is unexplored territory for you? I can't imagine there's something or even that you have time to maybe think about unexplored territory, but is there something that you would love to tackle maybe when you think of settling back a bit from politics? Is there something you'd like to tackle?
So there is another area, and this is a personal area for me, that I had started before my husband passed away in 2021. I had already taken the first course out of 4 to become a licensed lay worship leader with the United Church.
Okay.
So I have finished that, and I now speak usually 2 Sundays a month in different churches in the area. So that's
Oh,
kind of
wow.
a personal passion of mine. And I would do more of that. I enjoy it. I enjoy being with people and talking to people in a positive way and interpreting Bible scriptures so that people gain an understanding of what was actually intended. Because when the parables in the Bible don't always clearly indicate what they mean. So it's
Mm.
explaining what that means and applying it to our lives today.
Oh,
So
oh.
anything like that I can always be learning more and doing it. I find it calming when I sit down. It's not always calming. Sometimes I'm under deadlines to get a sermon ready for the next Sunday, and it's like, oh, there's 6 more meetings to go this week. But that's kind of my other thing that I do.
Oh, it comes back to reading.
It does. Now, someday I really want to get back to some of my basics. So I always knit a lot. I haven't knit much in the last couple of years through lack of time. I have 4 spinning wheels and 2 weaving looms that I really would like the time to use, but I'm not quite there
Wow.
yet. Yeah, I'll
That's,
get back there.
well, Mayor Carleton, tell me something that you've learned about yourself on this 8-year journey that you've been on. Tell me something that you've learned about you.
If I were to say, it would be probably most of it has happened in the last year, is being a leader and being able to do that, because it is not a place I ever saw myself. When I thought about running for mayor, it was like, seriously? People think this is a good idea? And this is not any place I saw myself. So that's a challenge to make sure I'm a good leader. And some of this I think of when my husband and I bought e-embroidery, and we knew nothing at all about what we were doing there. But we both have the attitude that we need to be good at what we do. And we weren't content to be mediocre. We wanted people to get a good job, a good product. And I think that's carrying over now. I want to be good at what I'm doing, and not for my own ego, because as soon as we let our ego get in the way, we go trip. So I try to keep the ego out of the way and make sure that what I'm doing is good for the community, that it's not lifting myself up on a pedestal, because you can only fall off of those. And I try to keep that humility that says, okay, that might have gone really well today, but the next meeting is probably going to trip me up. I'm going to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing at the wrong time. And so I think it's learning about my own ability to do things that I'm absolutely surprised when people say good job, because it's like, really? But I'll keep trying. I'll keep working.
Mayor Carleton, we're almost out of time, so I just have one more question. What advice would you give someone who's trying to find their voice or wanting to get involved in their community, whether it be on council or in community groups with the Township of Georgia Bluffs, but they're a little nervous or they think they don't have the experience? What advice would you give them?
I would suggest find a mentor. Talk to somebody who's already doing it. Ask them the questions and then listen. But find a mentor, somebody that can help lead them through, because some of the procedural bylaws and the ways that things have to be done, making motions and putting information on the floor for discussion and that, those are the things that a staff member can lead you through. Talk to somebody, though, that's already doing it to understand what are the important things you have to know. And know that when you go into this isn't something you show up at a meeting and start reading an agenda there. You're going to put 5, 10, 20 hours into reading and research before every meeting. And some weeks that can get a little overwhelming, because you might look at it and say, okay, I've got 2 meetings Wednesday, 1 Thursday, another Friday. So Monday and Tuesday are free, but they're not, because those are your reading days. You need those. So I really feel for people who are still working full time, and I have 5 on council who are doing that.
Yeah.
Connect with us by visiting our website or email us at comments@rogerstv.com.
On Rogers TV.
Are you low on food? Struggling to pay the bills? Overwhelmed by life's challenges?